the destruction by whatever means necessary, peaceful or genocidal, of all nations except one. If those who yearn for the pre-Babel language of the good old days generally have a more or less imperial yen, if I may call it that, for plural linguicides, those who crave for one world currency for the future usually want what I would call nomicides, literally from the Greek, meaning the killing off of other currencies. Linguicide and nomicide can be brought about through what I've called genocide. Debates about European monetary union in the last century clarify the operation of this sometimes terrible dialectic, even as they continue in the present period. On the one side of the debate are the arguments that its own currency is intimately linked, inextricably linked, with the foundation of each nation-state. I will now refer for the next few minutes to the founding fathers, as it were, of the European Union as a monetary union. I was, during the early 90s, involved in these discussions as a member of a delegation in France, of all places. Even, for that matter, I was involved with the design, partly my fault, of some of the stupider designs of the paper monies. Hoffman, I remember, said, most independent nations, except for a few that belong to currency unions, continue to issue their own currencies and use them within their borders. Hirsch, who interpreted the trend-setting Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, a key moment in the history of Europe so far as this goes. Hirsch wrote, one of the hallmarks of national sovereignty through the ages has been the right to create money. The ability to create its own domestic money is the key financial distinction of any nation-state. The Treaty of Westphalia, as I'm sure you know, was the foundational agreement between the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of France, along with their respective allies, and involved as much the right to linguistic autonomy as financial. Michael Musa, who for a time was the president of the Union, considering his path-breaking work at the European Union, wrote similarly that virtually all of the world's nations assert and express their sovereign authority by maintaining a distinct national money and projecting its use within respective jurisdictions. Money, he says, is like a flag. Indeed, it is the flag. Each country as country must have its own. On the other side of the debate, I hope you're noticing that whenever I present a side, I seem compelled here and now, the time being, to present the other side. On the other side of the debate, there are those economists who see nothing special in a nation's not having its own currency. Thus Fisher, also working at the Union, writes, there's nothing especially exotic about an economy that does not use its own money. Why not use the money of China or North Korea? Pascal Salin writes similarly, the production of money, like the production of law, is not an essential attribute of state sovereignty, despite what the mythology, he calls it, this is cute, says. Behind all such would-be demythologizing statements about nationhood and money, there often lurk inevitable oversimplifications. They're probably rhetorically necessary in all such disputes. In fact, a surprising number of economists in this area seem to agree explicitly with Harmelink that a nation is, I quote, this definition of nationhood, a nation is, I quote, merely a people with a common confusion as to their origins and a common antipathy to their neighbors. That word common, again. We are the people that the others are not. would seem to be the definition of nation in that realm. When one is armed with this simple, appealing credo, it's almost effortless to believe, as many economists do, that all that would be needed for world peace is a universal currency system. Such a universal system would mark the end of all national geography. It ought to happen. The new deterritorialized currency, say its sponsors, would now promote a different sense of identity, and presumably a much, much better one. Is not Europe, after all, more at peace now than it has been for the last 1,000 years? There are problems, though, with this hypothetical notion of future or past numismatic Pax Romana, Roman peace. First is the likelihood of the terrible genocides that any such pax or peace seems almost to presuppose as a foundational prerequisite. That is to say, the prerequisite for peace is war. Moreover, as Alexander Del Mar pointed out already in the 1890s, the actual or historical Pax Romana required a bimetallic standard: gold for imperial Rome and silver for the colonies. We could learn a thing or two about empire from Rome. Second, by way of a problem, is the list of venal or greed-based reasons why a sovereign, or the people as a sovereign, of whatever national stripe, should want to control his own coinage. Not the least of these reasons is what used to be called the seigniorage, that is to say, the excess of the nominal value of a currency over its cost of production, which can actually amount to hundreds of billions of dollars. Likewise, there is the view that we might explore later, if you ask, that a nation is really merely, anyhow, its own national debt. I'm not being ironic or humorous here. The notion that statehood and a single monetary system are inextricable brings us also to the argument of those money geographers, as they're called, like Boyer-Zambour, who claim that before the 19th century, the rule of thumb was that coins circulated everywhere without consideration for frontiers anyways. This claim disregards several factors that careful numismatists of the 19th century, whom I have often admired, would not have overlooked. First is the difference between fiduciary and non-fiduciary monies. Second is the difference between foreign tender and foreign legal tender. Only the latter, that is to say foreign legal tender, circulates with legal status thanks to nationally and legally and ultimately militarily enforced pegging of its rate. The former, mere foreign tender, is not pegged, but instead circulates, as I'm sure you know, as a regular commodity, much as the way wheat, silver, or electrum work. The claim that coin circulates without regard to frontiers thus involves us in questions of foreign tender, both legal and not. If, in the linguistic realm, we have translation, in the monetary realm, we have monetary conversion. Consider here the nation-state or group of nation-states we call the United States of America. Consider it as a precursor, if you will, to the European Union, as did the founding fathers of the European Union. In the United States, many languages other than English circulated at the time of the founding, only 37% of the people living in the United States in the 1770s, for example, spoke English. The others spoke a hodgepodge of languages from all over the world, including, of course, North America itself. This widespread presence of foreign languages in the United States, think of Europe now, which some observers have called peculiar, was due partly to the condition that there was no official language or languages in the United States. In fact, while there's an official language in Korea, Korean, there is still no official language in the United States. English was spoken by a very small number, as I've said. The parallel situation in the monetary realm was this. For the first 70 years of its existence, the United States of America had no single official national currency. This is such a little known fact that I want to repeat that. Little known because when I first looked into it, I could hardly believe it. For the first 70 years of its existence, the United States had no single national currency. From the start, therefore, Webster's Great American Dictionary was careful to include not only the meanings of words, but the values of foreign tender. At the time of the Civil War, the linguistic history of the United States finally diverged from its monetary history. It took only the death of 1 million people, not an entire genocide. Now there would be a single official currency, no more foreign legal tender after the Civil War. Nowadays, as you probably know, there is still not an official language, and it matters for the political discourse. But there is an official currency. This divergence, as I would call it, between the monetary and linguistic culture and history of the United States tends to obscure the formative and still informing cultural conditions of the United States during those 70 years, to which Lincoln refers. But let's move away a bit from the American example, which I offer here only as an example and not as an important case study in and of itself. By the 18th century, people had already long taken a single monetary standard and a single language to be the twin signs of nation statehood. Just consider here what European scholars used to call and still call the monetary condition of such city-statehood as that in ancient Greece, looked to in the West as the founding of politics, really. The same might be said for language, especially after the fall of such pluralist political institutions, that is to say, pluralist in the sense of differently combining parts with wholes, as the Ottoman Empire, with a different form of monetary union, the Habsburg Empire, and the new European Union as well in their way. One way to set out discussion of the homology, the likeness between money and language, involves defining their various syntaxes and then showing in what way nationally different banking systems can and cannot coexist. Scrutinizing the supposed material basis of currency systems, gold, silver, bronze, shell, grain, doesn't matter at all. That is the business of comparative numismatics, not comparative literature, which is my field. But comparative numismatics is an old-time precursor to what we now sometimes call the study of material culture in the monetary realm. These days, however, we are at a disadvantage in treating the languages of money, especially in the New World and the advanced part of the developing East Asian world, where so many different systems work at once. We are at a disadvantage, I would say, because a numismatics that heeds cultural specificities has played a relatively minor role in the social sciences in such places for a very long time. Nowadays, I think you would agree, numismatics interests many